players are going to perceive you taking actions that benefit you as less aggressive than actions that hurt them.
Distraction makers.
There's a situation in Commander that you hear a lot of advice about.
Yes.
Which is that you should attack early in the game when you have the opportunity to. And unfortunately, this is not accounting for this small piece of human psychology that's called action bias.
What's action bias?
Action bias, I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah.
Action bias is when you take action against someone, they are more likely to take action against you, even if the logical or optimal option is to take no action at all.
Before we talk about action bias today, please, if you enjoy the videos that we've been making, click the little like button. Maybe subscribe if you feel so inclined. Maybe leave a comment down below. I don't know. You could do any of that.
Yeah, join the Discord even.
You could join the Discord even.
Yeah,
you could do that.
Right. And you know what else you could do? You could back Forrest's Kickstarter.
What? That's right. I have a Kickstarter that should be live at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure it's live.
August 15th is when it went live, and it will be ending August 29th, and it is Kickstarter for my 5-color playmat series that you should see footage of floating on screen right now.
Woo,
so
looks good.
Wow.
Look
at that one.
Stitched edge.
Yeah.
Fancy.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, link is in the description below. Let's get back to the video. When you attack early in the game, it's more likely that opponent later in the game will take action against you.
Yes.
This sort of goes along with a few of our other videos in which we've discussed how sort of the systemic structures of Commander change your strategy.
Any opportunity for you to not have to spend resources is a good opportunity for you.
Or, any opportunity for you to spend resources on something that does not get you more resources. That's really the issue at hand, right? Is that what you want to be doing is spending your resources to get yourself more resources and stay ahead in sort of the race of the table.
Right. This is the guns versus butter thing that we've brought up in economics.
Yeah. And so when you're in the situation where you have a creature on board and other players don't, it might appear that you have a resource, right, which is your creature, that attacking is not costing you anything. Otherwise, that creature is just sitting there. Right. Now, it might be that, it's costing you the ability to block. But let's say that creature has vigilance, just to say.
Sure.
You're basically saying, okay, if I don't attack here, I am not using my resources optimally. Because if I do attack, I can remove some of my opponent's health.
And this is a common heuristic in Standard, right?
Yes.
And Standard, it's almost always, not that I'm a super high-level Standard player, but for the most part, I think people would recommend, if you can, and it's not necessarily a problem with, being able to block or not block, you should just ping someone for 1 damage. 9
times out of 10, you should attack in 1v1. The resource that this is not accounting for in Commander, however, is sort of the political resource.
Right.
Where, like I said, this action bias that we're talking about means that since you attacked that player early, they are more likely to interact with you later. Right. Which means they were more likely to interrupt you, improving your economy to the point where you can become overwhelming and win the game.
And we should probably discuss that this is more so true in a casual pod. At a certain level of competitiveness, people understand why players have to do this particular thing, and that type of a bias is not nearly as strong because people understand the system. They understand why players are doing what they're doing, but also in a competitive format, they might not be swinging in that same way because they might be utilizing this sort of action bias.
Yeah. So something to think about in terms of a tournament setting and how you might think about this action bias is that a lot of it might have more to do with reputation, right? In terms of in this game, you did this, and then that's carried through to a later game where you might be playing with another player. Maybe it's a different day, maybe it's a different tournament or whatever. But there is a potential there for you to have won against that player previously, and now they are carrying that through with them to this new game, right? And that's not to say you shouldn't win, right? Obviously, you got to win.
Right.
But I think that's how this presents itself.
Sort of small incremental things that build up into a narrative of who that player is as a person.
Right, and it's also sort of the irrational carrying of, well, that player beat me last time, I will therefore act slightly more aggressively towards them.
Right.
Which does happen, even in a competitive setting, and is something that competitive players must be aware of, that you could be committing that bias, basically. Right. To your own detriment.
So guns versus butter is something that we've kind of talked about in the past, where it's an economic theory that's essentially you can either create guns or you can create butter. You can create actions or you can build up resources. And so guns in this case would be targeting a bunch of people, a bunch of your opponents with spells, dealing damage, creatures, etc. Resources, that's card advantage, that's mana, that's any sort of an additional advantage that you might have in resources that your opponents don't have. And we've kind of discussed, I think we talked about it in the bystanding video, maybe, that Commander's system generally benefits more of a butter strategy, right, basically.
So in the sort of economic theory world, right, you would make guns, right? We're talking about, military defenses, those sorts of things. You would make those things because you're either trying to defend your own resources or conquer someone else's.
Right.
And so when we think about like, all right, well, if you have a guns economy, then you are using those resources to acquire someone else's resources. But when we bring that into a magic setting, you interacting with another player, the only benefit that you can get is just not losing the game.
Right.
If you destroy somebody's creature, you don't then gain control of their creature.
Right. Think of, for anyone that's played like Civilization games or Risk or anything like that, commonly in those games, you end up taking over that player's territory. You've invested guns and therefore received their resources. That does not exist in Magic in a systemic way.
Right, and that would be potentially a very interesting Commander
format. I think it'd be very cool. I think it'd be really cool.
That maybe we'll explore one day.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's really the guns versus butter argument, is that in Commander there is no incentive for guns other than just don't lose the game. And so optimally when you're playing the game, you're going to be effectively ignoring other players unless you absolutely have to, and focusing on your own economy, which is drawing cards, playing extra lands, building up to the point where you're overwhelming.
Yeah.
So we see players try to alleviate this action bias by doing things like rolling a die or saying, well, I'm attacking you because you have more health.
Yeah.
Or like you'll say, you could even say something like, well, I would attack you, but I'm not going to.
Right.
And that helps you sort of curry favor with other players in terms of like, well, you can call back to some way that you helped them earlier in the game or didn't. I think what's even more interesting is there's ways for you to sort of politic your way into saying, well, I didn't hurt you, therefore you should help me, right?
It's like the opposite sort of effect that you'd have from action bias. And I think that's the thing that not enough people, I think, utilize. We could get into like how you can embrace action bias and stuff later, but ultimately all of this comes down to politicking, right?
Sure.
Action bias only exists because of the ability to politic in that game and the influence that you can have over other players in the game based off of the actions and how they've affected you.
Well, this really, like gets tied in with threat assessment too, right?
Yeah.
When we see sort of these formulas or these ideas about how to like properly threat assess, really the only threat assessment that needs to be done is whether or not someone is winning the game, or sort of ahead of you in the race.
And that's what you see. I mean, it's what you see in like competitive EDH, right? Yeah. Is that you see a lot of players that they might play a card and people are like, okay, and then they play another card and they're like, okay, and then they play their third card and that's the real card, and then everyone's like, oh, okay, counterspell.
Yeah.
And like every game is basically that.
Yeah.
Whether you mean for it to be or not, it's just on a level of effectiveness or table knowledge, right? Like, but that's essentially what the system is supporting or encouraging.
Right. Well, and like many games of CEDH don't really care about health totals much at all.
Right.
Life total is seen much more as like sort of a resource to cast things like ad nauseum, or just be spent to, make more butter.
Yeah.
But one way that you can think about, like, okay, do I want to affect someone's life total, is if they are attempting to use it as a resource. You can then knock them down some points so that they don't get to draw as many cards off ad nauseum, right?
Right.
So even then, right, when you are choosing to attack another player, you are opening yourself up to them taking action against you, even if that, like the sort of attack that you took isn't really all that meaningful in the grand scheme of things.
Right. And I think like that risk is just not worth it, right?
Right.
Like, I think it's way more worthwhile in the early game to basically tell someone, I could attack you, but I'm choosing not to.
Yep.
Remember that. And like,
Yeah.
it seems dumb and small, and it's dumb table politics. I think a lot of people kind of look at that as like a negative side of Commander, but I think that that's what the game is best at doing. And I think in a more casual environment or casual pod, there's going to be people that will go along with that in almost like a role-playing sort of a way and be like, yeah, okay, I owe you one. Even though it doesn't matter. Like, you got pinged for 1 or whatever, or pinged for, like, it could be 5. It's 5 damage. I don't think ultimately that's going to be a huge impact by the end of the game.
Right. So we even see like Wizards of the Coast designing things to sort of play around with action bias, the goad mechanic in particular. And what's so interesting about it is that you, as the player who put goad on a creature, right, it can't attack you, and now it has to attack. The player who's attacked by it subconsciously is much more likely to perceive that as that player attacking them, right? Especially because there's 4 players. So they would think, oh, well, you could have attacked that other player, right? But you chose to attack me. Even though you, as the person who put goad on the creature, is the one who ultimately made that happen. And so when we start to look at like ways we can use action bias as a strategy in Commander, there's actually an area of the Charmed Apple deck that I have been working on recently that is exploring this very idea, in that everything I'm doing is spending my resources to help other players help them, right? And in that way, I want those players to perceive me as helping them. Therefore, I am the last person that they would want to be attempting to hurt.
Right.
And then the idea is, by the end of the game, I have also the things and ways in which I am helping other players is that I am also getting those resources back. So it's a lot of stuff that draws cards from playing those things. So theoretically, the perception is that I'm spending resources to help them,
right?
But I'm actually not spending those resources.
It's kind of what group hug decks do, right? Where it's like you're helping other players, we're all having a good time, but you're mostly helping yourself. It's not even so much like you're helping us. It's more so, I think a lot of the times group hug just kind of, it doesn't quite seem like what your strategy is very clear, right? And that's why it seems so pacifist. Yeah. And so if other players at the table end up looking more like threats, or they are attacking each other, then I'm able to sort of just sit back and be like, I don't know, I'm just here.
And this sort of also puts us in that situation of like never wanting to look like the threat, right? So I do wonder how much of the sort of perceived actions of a player get viewed by other players as being detrimental when it's something that you're doing to help yourself, right? That's I think where the sort of crux and politics of the situation really comes in, is that players are going to perceive you taking actions that benefit you as less aggressive than actions that hurt them, right?
Yeah.
And that's just action bias. That's just what it is, right?
Yeah.
So I think that some of the ways that game designers have tried to alleviate this problem is making it so you have only one particular person that you can attack in a multiplayer setting. We see a lot of like, okay, well, you can only attack the person to your left, or the person across the table from you, or in like King of Tokyo's example is that, well, when one person's in Tokyo, they're the only person we're attacking.
Right. And it's also that you have to attack. If you end up rolling attack, then you have to attack in that game. And I think that that's one way that you can sort of work around it. Is I don't think it's bad to necessarily have other players get hit if that's the sort of environment that you want. You want to, Magic does this with Goad, like we talked about, is like you want players to feel slighted in a way. You want them to be like, well, I'm going to get you back, and sort of encourage that interaction. And I think that this is why they've done this. It's not just enough for Goad to say you can only attack other players. It's that you have to attack in order to make sure that that interaction is happening, because otherwise everyone's just going to collect butter. Everyone's just going to build their resources.
Right.
But the second someone swings at you, you're like, okay, and then you swing back.
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
I think another way that like a game designer could try to alleviate some of this action bias problem is incentivizing action more than what Commander does, right? Give players rewards for interacting with their opponents.
Right. This is the civilization risk, war games type of a
in
approach.
That you can claim territory or
right.
whatever. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, I guess at the end here, think before you attack, and sometimes your instincts of, well, I don't want to make anybody upset, is actually what you should be doing. Always trying to get those early points of damage in. Probably not really worth it.
Probably not worth it.